Okay. All right, you can start, Angela, if you want.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Sage Data and Analytics webinar. I will now throw it over to Trey.
Oh, thank you very much, Angela. And it's really a pleasure to be here. Certainly such a great opportunity to do this session for Pur-Logic and their customers, and to talk a little bit about Sage Data and Analytics and what we bring to the Sage ecosystem. As we get into this, one of the things that we wanted to really share is, kind of the common challenges that were really the driving force behind Sage Data Analytics coming from the X3 world into the Sage 100 and 300 world. The reality is a lot of the challenges that we experienced and solved, in the Sage X3 world are really amplified amongst the Sage 100 and Sage 300 user community. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that organizations such as your own have a lot of different demands on your time. The time is possibly even more precious in that regard. And so it creates a scenario where generating reports, keeping up with the reporting, keeping across the data to make better decisions becomes a slightly taxing thing for the organization. And so that is certainly one of the things that's really a highlight in terms of the challenges that we help to solve for. Beyond that, the pandemic also really introduced a scenario where people believe that they should have access to the things that they need kind of wherever they are, as long as they have an internet connection. The fact that Sage Data and Analytics is a cloud delivered application simply means that you have that capability, and we have that ability to interface with your Sage 300 environment, bring that data to the cloud and make it available. So for users that maybe sit outside of the ERP but are decision makers nonetheless, they have the ability to use a variety of different devices and means to get to that information. Beyond that, there's a few other items as it relates to financial information, the further insights that you get. But one of the things that we really want to push and make sure that is well understood by is that you have some important business decisions to make. You want to do so in a timely fashion, and you really should have an out-of-the-box set of analytics to get you started on that path. And so that's a big part of what we'll describe today. And so what really sets Sage Data and Analytics apart from maybe the other tools you've experienced or possibly have tried to use in the past? One of the big elements is we're actually taking the burden away from the ERP, bringing the data into the cloud as a cloud-based data warehousing platform, and doing so in a way that all of that automation and that heavy lifting of moving data around and making sure it's in the best shape possible for reporting is something that we solve for out of the box. So there's not a lot of work that's done to retrieve the data. Now, some of you may be sitting there and have been staring at multi-sheet workbooks that you've spent a lot of time having to working around with VLOOKUPs and other things, or maybe just there's some human behaviors. I talked to one controller just recently, and she quite literally is physically challenged, when it comes time to do the reporting, because it's just so taxing on her. She spends too many hours trying to accelerate through a process that the business doesn't quite understand why it takes as long as it does. And that's something we're really proud of, is the fact that we solve for that in a very significant way, starting with the data management. But beyond that, what's also delivered in the box, as you see in the graphic in the middle of the screen, we're moving the data from Sage 300 into that cloud-based SD&A model, but we're also providing for a set of analytics that are out the right-hand side. So we'll show you all of these things live in a moment, but underneath those analytics are a full range of out-of-the-box calculations. And it's these out-of-the-box calculations that really serve as the building blocks for not only what we're delivering out of the box, but also those calculations can be reused by you or with the Pur-Logic staff to really make sure that you get to the best possible outcomes with the least amount of effort. If these calculations are already there and you do that initial validation, which is part of the initial implementation, once those things are validated, then you're really in a great shape to reuse those calculations as you see fit across your business. The added benefit is if somebody changes some nuance of one of the calculations, you change it in one place and it propagates across all of the reporting that you've done. So you won't have to worry about, is this the most correct version of the calculation or not? You'll know that that reused calculation is giving you that benefit. Beyond that, there's also just the strong capability to quite literally be looking for data within the analytics very quickly, literally within hours, because what we're doing is we're accelerating the deployment of the software because we're configuring and deploying a cloud-based environment. There's a small piece that gets deployed wherever your Sage 300 ERP happens to be, and that data gateway serves as the means of conveying information to the cloud. And so it's really that simple to get that piece put into place. And then the balance of the time and the hours that we're spending is making sure that information ties out correctly, that your chart of accounts maps in, the other things that are naturally going to support the full range of use cases that you'll have for the solution. And I'd be remiss if I didn't describe the fact that, you know, for customers that are on 300 today that might be looking down the road at other Sage ERP products, well, we're also there as well. So it's a great opportunity for you not only make an investment today to get to a real robust set of data and analytics, but know that that data and those analytics will work well wherever you happen to go within the Sage ecosystem. And so that's an important element that we tend to sometimes miss, but you know, it's certainly something that's important for those of you that are considering, you know, what are your continuation of Sage 300 plus possibly other ERPs as well. So with that, I'll actually switch over into product demonstration. The great news here is I quite literally just need to bring up a browser. And so where we'll start within the browser itself is on the Chief Financial Officer dashboard. And so this is a view similar to, you know, some of the other dashboards that we have that would be presented to a user that's really not necessarily interested in doing any design or building of reports on their own, but rather they're just consuming what others have shared. And so in this case, we have out-of-the-box analytical content that starts with the CFO dashboard. We have other dashboards as well that I'll get into. But as we look at this particular dashboard view, you'll notice there's a few ways that we empower the decision makers. And we really fully believe that dashboards are a very good starting point for a lot of the decision makers around the organization. Lets them take on a large amount of information in a single view and then choose where they want to go analytically. Now, the easiest question and answer to start with is to simply move on from looking at all companies and maybe look at just a subset of those. And so as you'll notice, as I'm clicking and, you know, choosing some additional companies here, that the data itself is changing, that the items underneath are repopulating. Now, you possibly have not ever had that experience pointing at your ERP because the tools that you've probably traditionally used really sending a lot of queries and quite honestly burdening the ERP as a platform to respond. So the great news is you have the cloud-based data warehouse that we're providing with Sage Data and Analytics. And that means that as your users decide to ask whatever questions they ask, that they're getting answers back in a very efficient manner. And that navigation not only takes the form of being able to ask questions across the filters that are at the top, but also when possibly they see a data point that's of interest, being able to select that data point. And in this case, I just double clicked, that's drilling me down. It's taking me down a level within this chart. Now I could continue to navigate down and explore, or in this case, if I wanted to go back up, I could drill back up as I have done. The other thing that we do is we build analytical pathways into the analytics that we have available. And what that ultimately means is when I'm looking at this particular view, I might data analytics that I want to look at. So by right clicking on this, I can actually open, in this case, an income statement dashboard. And so what you're seeing here is, well, firstly, the data is a little bit sparse because of the demonstration nature of the information, but you're seeing that we can very much format and render information in traditional financial reporting orientations, but we also can support that with a range of other data and data points. The most important thing I'd want to probably convey looking at this particular dashboard is as elements are discovered that are within the financial reports or within the charts, we can actually single click on them, and I'm right clicking, and that can create what is called a detailed report. Now, in this case, there's not a lot of data underneath the data points that we're looking at. So these 10 or 12 column rows of data likely would be 10 or 12 pages of data in the real world. And so not only do we have the ability to create the report structure here and change, kind of the orientation of the columns to suit what you want to see, but at some point, if you end up with too much information within this context of your browser, you can also export that information to Excel. And while we don't necessarily condone, doing all of your analytics within Excel, invariably there's going to be some times where you need to do some number crunching, within Excel, and that's what it's incredibly good at. And so you could actually export the information out to Excel if you had the privileges to do so. So if we navigate back here, we go back to not only where we were before, but maybe all the way back to the CFO dashboard, you'll notice that there's a full range of other analytical elements. So things like, activity and profitability as other performance cards, those elements also start to make their way down into the analytics that we see on the screen. And that's the building block nature of what we do. At AR, for example, and maybe I drill into the open accounts receivable dashboard, what you'll notice here is very much so that these analytical elements, DSO, days sales outstanding, average days delinquent, that they make their way into tables and other things that we would use as other means of doing reporting. And that's true also of the charts that you see here. And so we really are trying to engender that flexibility that you can continue to take those building block type calculations and not only leverage them within the existing analytics, but as you'll see in just a little bit, you can also build your own reports. And that building of your own reports or reorienting what you see on the dashboards is really the intent behind us delivering out of the box analytical content. We don't think that the analytics that we deliver out of the box is going to be a perfect fit for every organization. However, it's much easier for you as a customer to look at a piece of analytics, say, I like this, but I would like it more if this was focused on quarters versus months, or I could do without this particular gauge that's on the dashboard, and we'd like to replace it with something else. Those are all of the different types of things that naturally start to come forward as requirements once you've gone through the basic implementation of Sage Data and Analytics. So you are really powerfully helping Pur-Logic and the folks that are supporting you in terms of your SD&A deployment get you to the exactly correct outcomes that you want to see. So if we go back here again, that brings us back to the CFO dashboard. And I know we've probably got more than just, financially oriented people in the audience. So if I go back here, this is the way that the consumer user, now remember this consumer user does not have to be an ERP user. This is just a licensed named user, but that consumer user can interact with all of the different folders of information that we have. So if I go into sales, for example, and go into this VP of sales dashboard, there's one other thing that I just want to highlight on this particular view that I think might be interesting for the audience is not only can we drive additional questions and answers by selecting from the filters, by drilling up and down, but we can also tie analytical elements together. So for example, if I was interested in looking at what was happening in a region, well, I select that region and now all the data starts to recalculate in support of what's going on there. So those are the kind of things that we naturally allow for and bring forward to support that asking of that secondary or that tertiary question. So you're not really burdening a single individual with, could you give me another report or another dashboard view for Spain or for another region, those sorts of things. And when we want to revert the focus to kind of all regions, well, we just simply select off of that on that particular chart, and that's how. So it's intended to be, excuse me, that straightforward and that easy, and really allow for decision makers that maybe have only traditionally looked at tables of information to have a bit of an exploratory experience with a slightly more visually oriented data set. But that's not really solely where it ends. There's also a full range of capabilities around building out more traditional tabular reports So what we'll do in just a few minutes is go there. But in order to go there, I'm going to actually switch out of this consumer view into a designer view. And the great news is switching over to that other view is simply a matter of changing browser tabs here. So this browser tab orientation that we have brings us into Sage Data and Analytics, allows me to navigate the folder structure more as a designer, allows me to interact with the various items that are there. Most notably, you'll notice there's a thing here that says Sage 300 data model. We've looked a bit at the analytical content, but we haven't really talked as much about the data. And so what I wanted to do is bring up this model first. And the model, without going incredibly deep on this, is a little bit more technically oriented, but that is something that generally is supported by your partner in Pur-Logic. It's something that is really kind of brought online for your organization so that you can do decision making and do the report development, which I'll show in just a moment. But just to give you the basics or the fundamentals around the model, one or more data sources serves as the starting point. Now, those data sources typically start with Sage 300 as the primary data source. What we also have is we have the ability to add additional data sources. And so what I've done is I've just brought that up on screen here. And so as an organization, you likely have Sage 300 as your primary data source. Have Sage X3 as your primary data source, but you might also have a full range of additional data sources that you might choose to include. Now that might include a marketing or CRM application like HubSpot or like Salesforce, or it could include a more traditional database application that's running in your business on SQL Server or another database platform. Or it could be that Excel workbook that everybody says is super important. You can bring those additional data sources in alongside of the ERP. And then beyond that, you can also explore other data that maybe you've never had access to previously. That can include cloud-based data sources through the REST APIs and through OData interfaces. So you really have some ways to do some very unique things, including how about we go out and source some weather information or source some other indicators that are sitting out more in the public domain. You can bring those in and it can certainly support the analytics to do. But going back to the model itself, if I click back here, we have a data source. It's very simply a matter of checking boxes for the data that you want to include. So if I look at the Sage 300 data source specifically, well, you'll notice that we have the internal table names, which some of you may be really familiar with. I prefer not to be. The captions are something that we also retrieve very smartly from that underlying data source. And what that ultimately means is when you see a table listed here, whether it be standard or customized, you can actually check the box and you will bring that table into the data warehouse, into the Sage Data and Analytics solution, and be available for the purposes of the reporting. There's other things that can be done here, but once we simply have checked the box and we say to add that as a pipeline, if I come back here to the model, we have additional pipelines. And these pipelines, again, represents what comes out of the box. It's really kind of the best practices sets of data that live within your ERP. Typically, we're only retrieving about 20 to 30% of the data from within your ERP because the rest of it really drives the ERP, but it doesn't provide for any real analytical meaning. So as an example, you know, I could do sales order lines. Here's an example to pull up a pipeline for us to look at. And you'll notice that there's multiple steps that are kind of happening here. And now you might say, gosh, that's you know, a lot to understand or a lot to interpret. The great thing is we've broken this up into really kind of bite-sized chunks with these different steps. So we have the incoming columns, then we have the outgoing columns, and these basically build on one another. So if I get to the delivery calculation step, what you'll notice is that not only are we able to bring forward the columns, but we're able to introduce additional calculations. So if I click on the days to ship difference, what you'll notice here is that we have built a calculation around calculating the difference in days for shipping. That drives an aging calculation that also drives some other downstream calculations that are in reports and whatnot. And so that's a really powerful element. So if you are sitting there and you have some SQL knowledgeable folks in your organization, that's great. But just know you don't have to know SQL to work with this tool set. The calculations that we've built in, the way that these things behave, those stay incredibly standardized. And so as a result, what you end up with is you end up with a very common analytical platform that supports a full range of things up to and including, as you'll notice on this last step, the currency conversion. The other thing that's really nice about this, and I probably need to go back to this friendly name step, is we also have where you see this magnifying glass, the lookups. And what that ultimately means is that we can look up data from other tables. So in this case, I know customers is related. If I wanted the city of the customers on the sales order lines to help with the reporting, well, I expand that, I check the box, and I'm done. So you don't have to know any SQL to do that. It's very easy for people to understand the mechanics of adding columns, of adding tables, working beyond the standard model. That is not something that is a purely technical requirement. And as a result, we have a lot of the customers of SD&A who had originally started off working exclusively with their partner to deliver this solution. They started to take on board those skills through our great education platform to really start to bring them into those skills in-house. So if we go back here to the model, the last things that I'll just mention very quickly is there's an opportunity to really bring the data in on a regular basis. Because the data warehouse sits in the cloud, we do have to process the data out of the ERP and deliver it to the data warehouse. Now, the way that the processing works is we can set up one or more of these configurations. And if you're working with Pur-Logic as your partner, they can really get this set exactly for you. But you have the options that are up top. Then what you have is you have the ability, and this is very common for our customers that are using SD&A to support their financial reporting. And yes, we have a full range of analytics that support financials. And so what they typically do is rather than process the entire data warehouse, they may choose to refresh that financial data multiple times during the day. So they would choose the general ledger and the related chart of accounts, pipelines. They would choose this incremental. And where it says schedule, they would check the box. But rather than say, I want to run it every day at a particular time, they say, I want to run this on an interval, say every 5 minutes between 2 hours of the day. And so what that means is that you can quite literally, over the course of the business day, say from 9 to 5 or from 10 to 2 or whatever you choose, you could refresh the data much more frequently. And those frequent refreshes then mean that the reports that probably will run a lot faster than the reports that you're running directly against the ERP right now come back and provide the information that you need in a very timely fashion. And so there's a lot of other capabilities around this that maybe are just more worth a one-on-one demo with your organization, but know that this is a very powerful element, and it is the data element of Sage Data and Analytics. And so getting back to the analytics side of things, I'm going to go to this new resource is just simply something that I chose from this menu option, where I could choose to build a chart, a table, a dashboard, or any of these other items. I've chosen to build an analysis table. So on the right-hand side, I have a view of that model. Now the model itself, because we're talking about ERP, it does tend to be a little bit complicated. So we have measures or the numbers that we would use to analyze. And then underneath that are all of the different dimensions or topics that we would use to analyze by. Now you'll notice if I scroll this scroll bar, well, there's a lot of topics in the ERP, and that could be overwhelming, except for we do some really great things for the designer users of our product. Firstly, we give them the ability to come in here and choose, what they're most interested in. So for example, well, let's do sales invoice lines. That might be a little bit better. So invoice including tax, we'll drop that on the columns. And you'll notice nearly right away, we got a number back. And so that's great. Maybe that's the only number we're interested in for the moment. So we'll collapse this, but notice what happened when I collapsed the numbers folder. All of the topics got reduced to only those that are related to the metrics. the beauty of that is you don't have to know the ERP well. You don't have to know the data in the ERP well, but rather you just have to have a sense of the numbers that you're going after. And so this really serves as a great place for people that maybe have not built reports to start considering building some analytics for themselves and for others. We can really do some expanded things here. So for example, I might choose company. I'm going to drag company up to the slicer. The slicer is just a really fancy term for the drop-down filter that we have at the top here. And then what I'll do is I'll actually maybe choose items. And know that not only are there some standard attributes that are part of the model, but the other extended elements that one might choose to include can be there as well. And I'm going to put this on rows. And so you'll notice that we have a slight arrow to the left of these item names. This means that we can actually expand this and we can kind of drill down and notice that the information is delivered instantaneously. And so you can have multi-level hierarchies that support analysis in this way. Now, one of the things that is pretty typical is people tend to look at this based on periods of time. So if I go to date, and I go to either the calendar orientation or the fiscal orientation. And you may be sitting there saying, well, what's the difference? We're January to December. Well, there are some organizations that run on different fiscal calendars versus a traditional December calendar. And so we do have support for both of those, where you see the YQMD or the YWD, year, quarter, month, day, or year, week, day. And you can create any number of date elements that drive the hierarchical orientation things. So what I'll do is I'll expand the fiscal. I'm going to drag the fiscal year. I'm going to drag it up to the slicer for a moment because I just want to look at the data that we have. So if I go up here to 2021, well, I've got a pretty good representation of data in 2021. If I go down into the quarters, yeah, we're looking pretty good there, so on and so forth. So really, it really looks good for what we're trying to do. Now, I may decide that I don't really want that as a filtering element at all, so I remove that. What that does is that just clears the way for me to use these time functions. And so these time functions, what's really great about these is so often we're building a report for a particular period. Maybe it's the current quarter, or it's the current month, or it's a year to date, or the quarter to date, things of that nature. So that's where the current period elements come in. So I'm going to actually just drag current year to the column. And so you see the 2021. Now, I don't like how this is stacking up, so I'm just going to move this metric to the background. So we don't really need to see that as a column header. Now, what I can do is I can do a full range of things. The simplest thing for me to do is I'm going to right click, drag and drop current year, and I'm going to do time, parallel period, period and prior year. And now we've got 2021 versus 2020. Now that's good, but I probably likely want to calculate some difference or something along those lines. So you can absolutely build formulas within this product as well. So in this case, I'll actually choose to calculate the difference. And we'll leave it at that. And what we'll do to build the formula is I'm going to do, let's say, the prior year. And I'm going to subtract from that the current year. Now, of course, the formula is invalid until I add the rest of the mathematical formula there. And I'm going to click on apply. And so now we have a difference that we can see and that we can appreciate. And so whether I'm looking at it in this view or I'm expanding this to look at different item statistical groups, or if I'm actually even reducing this to a smaller set of companies, well, I have the ability to ask those questions and get those answers, even in this designer view. And however I choose to save it, that's how end users will experience it initially. And then they can, depending on what the rights you've given to them, they can modify the filters and other things as well. Now, beyond this, we might want to look at in a little bit more of a graphical form. And so I just simply switch on the option for a chart. Not the prettiest of charts, so we'll go into the chart appearance, the chart design, and we'll change the chart type. I can't do a whole lot because there's so many negative items below the bar there, but we'll kind of orient this a little bit differently. We'll actually also expand this a little bit bigger so that we can, see things a little bit differently there. But know that you have full control over the things that you want to see, including you can choose what you want to actually chart. So if I select those two columns and then do select data, that then takes away the difference, gives me a slightly more pleasing way of looking at the information. But again, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the things that you do here, including all of the different controls around the chart as well. If you're happy with this, what you do is you save this item off, and you can save it. And I'll go ahead and click save. And we'll click and save this to my own personal folder. So that's me, Trey. I'm going to call this the Pur-Logic example. Then what I'll do is I'll come over here to the folder and I'll right click on this and I'll say get link, and I'm going to open this up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up as if I was a consumer type user. And so now I can look at information technology. Boy, that's a little bit busy. So why don't we just fully drill down on information technology, and that lets us look at this particular set of items. But you understand, kind of the basics, that we can move very quickly from what was a demonstration here, building a report, to something that people can consume. And so as an organization, if you've struggled with defining reports, you've got 2 or 3 people that are weighing in on what something should like, well, book 30 minutes in a meeting room, throw this up on a projector, have the designer join you in the room, and build the report and get it 80 to 90% of the way there. And then from there, that person has very clear direction on what they need to do and finish. And now you're investing an hour or 2 of your time to get to the reports that you want, and they'll be there perpetually versus having to manually handcraft reports out of Excel and other products that maybe take a little bit too much of your time. So the last thing that I really want to touch upon is, we've shown you the interactive side of the experience here, which is a very powerful one. But we also realize that there are going to be users that maybe need something arriving more regularly in their inbox. And so the way that works is we have what are called publication rules. And so publication rule it's just simply an email editor on steroids that allows for you to choose the different analytics to include or format the message in the way that you would like for it to go out. And then you also define how it's triggered to the end user. And the reason that you're defining how it's triggered to the end user is because sometimes you want to deliver a weekly report to everybody's inbox on a scheduled basis. And weekly reports or regularly scheduled reports are not necessarily a bad thing. But if your data doesn't change a lot over the period of time, then people become a little bit desensitized to it, and then they stop opening it. Case in point, I haven't opened my cable bill in about 5 years because it's always the same information. But if there is something a little bit different that's going on in the business that we want people to be aware of, we can also set it up so we can monitor data points. So quite literally, we can look at the cash on hand or inventory levels or any of a number of other things, and we can set it up in such a way that once we move past the acceptable threshold, we cross the limit, if you will, triggers the notification out to people that that limit has been crossed, that there's an attachment that's sent to them. They can get that attachment as an Excel file if it's tabular. If it's visual, it comes to them as a PDF, or it can simply be a link that brings them back into Sage Data and Analytics as an application. And for the really complex requirements where you want to show a lot of information to a group of users, we also have what are called report packs. And so this is a report pack. And what a report pack does, it allows you to take multiple pieces of analytical content and structure them in such a way as they're a presentable deliverable to the end user group. This actually came about as a capability, firstly to support reporting amongst executive teams and to board members, but it's become so popular that people are using it to ship it out across their organization, but also to report amongst others. Now there's a cover page here, obviously, that you fully control what you want to see, but then it's also just simply what the users would have seen working within the application. So we see the dashboard orientation, we see the financially oriented statements. We also happen to see in this particular page, a narrative. So you can actually incorporate narratives into this. And we have chosen to bold some of these numbers. The reason we have is because these numbers are dynamically calculating. And so those bolded numbers just simply allow us to see that every time we run this, those numbers would be recalculated. And the really great news is if you have some security requirements that mean that a certain person can only see a certain region, things like that, even with the report packs, when you send a report pack out to, say, a management team, if a person's only allowed to see one region, that's all they're going to see in the reports because we're controlling the data and the analytics. And so it makes it just that much more powerful for those users. And so there's a lot of things that can be done here in terms of the items out. It is certainly, one of the key elements that brings an entirely additional group of users into the fold. By the way, sending these things out as attachments on emails is entirely free as far as the user base is concerned. The only users that are really looked at and licensed are the ones that come through and use the product interactively or doing design work. And so that's probably a good cue to just do a couple more minutes of slides, review a little bit of the commercial aspects of what we've done to package the solution, and then in a few moments, we can open things up to questions. So this is, just some high-level guidance around the packaging approach. What we've done is we've really tried to build a set of options that means that regardless of your size as an organization using Sage 300, there is very much an option for you. This package needs to be in a position where not only can it be deployed quickly, really get to the heart of the things that you want to do with Pur-Logic as your Sage certified business partner to ensure that SD&A is just really powerful for your organization. I think those of you that maybe have previously invested or looked at other technologies will probably realize that this is highly competitive, but this is basically the orientation of the packages. And it really does start somewhat with the pricing that you see at the top. These are annualized prices. These annualized prices are the cost of the software plus the hosting in US dollars. So quite literally, you're sub $300 a month, sub $500 a month, sub $800 a month on a monthly cost breakdown, obviously paid annually, to get not only the hosting, but also the software product and the out-of-the-box analytical content. Where you land in these different packages depends a little bit on your organization. If you're an organization that has companies, a few users, or only wants to focus on the GL, AR, and AP, then standard might be a very good place for you to start. There are some limits on each one of these. On this standard plan, basically, if you want to move beyond the initial users, you need to look at advanced. What advanced really provides is it provides the opportunity to explore more companies. It also provides the great opportunity to start with essentially twice the users. You'll notice the 10, the 30, and the 75 gigabytes. That is the amount of data that gets uploaded to the cloud. So even if you're sitting there with a Sage 300 database that's 50 gigabytes in size, you're probably great because what we only really do is bring about 20 or 30% of those 50 gigabytes out. So you're 10 or 15 gigabytes of data, which very much fits into the advanced in terms of this solution. You'll notice that across all of these, there's the refresh. It says one scheduled refresh per day. That is a customer allowance. However, when you work with Pur-Logic or Pur-Logic plus the SD&A team, you can set up multiple refreshes throughout the day. It just has to conform with our fair use policy on the cloud, which basically means that you're not going to be processing data into the cloud for more than 2 hours per day, which those individual increments of refreshing every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, in most organizations' cases, that's a couple minutes at a time. So it's not really a big concern in terms of fair use. On the advanced plan, there are extras that are available. The data model design, if you're looking to modify the data model and you're not using staff from Pur-Logic, then you would end up needing to license that capability on the advanced plan. The Pur-Logic staff, as a Sage and SD&A partner, have the ability to do those modifications on your behalf without there being any additional licensable elements. You do have the consumers, the data source connections. So you start with one, which is for Sage 300 on the advanced plan. If you choose to include something from HubSpot, something from another database application, that would be considered an additional connection. Excel is not considered an additional connection. So if you have Excel data to add, you're good there. The premium plan just simply kind of unlocks everything. So you can have more companies than 5. You have a significant number of additional users. You start off with 5 additional connections, larger data allowances in terms of 75 gigabytes. And it just really kind of solves a lot of the larger scale requirements that some organizations may have. You may also notice that there's an element that mentions Power BI integration. If you've previously made any investments around Power BI and you're looking to hold on to that technology in conjunction with Sage Data and Analytics, well, you can actually source data that's in the Sage Data and Analytics warehouse for the purposes of use in Power BI, and that's enabled on the premium plan. There are add-ons. The costs are listed here. I'm so thankful we're recording this, because a lot of times people like to go back and kind of press pause at this point in the video and look at this a bit more closely. But it certainly is something we've tried to really make condensable into a slide, something that hopefully people can understand. And so the last elements that we really wanted to cover off is just to talk with you about where you can get more information. And so what's really great is Sage University has a platform for delivering all of the Sage data and analytics content, whether a person be interested in learning more about designing analytics, manipulating the data model, working exclusively with financial reports, or simply doing a level of administration. There's courses that are available there, in addition to anytime learning that is self-study materials that everyone has access to. In terms of the ongoing support model, Pur-Logic would be, kind of your first point of contact. You would always want to talk with them about some unique things you want to do, additional reports, things of that nature. The second level of support is the Sage support organization, and Zap, who are the publisher of Sage Data and Analytics, is kind of the most escalated level of support. And so one of the things that I would highly recommend is, if you get with the account management or your point of contact at Pur-Logic, they can get you pointed at these various ebooks. If there's someone that if you're watching this video and you want somebody else to understand a bit more about what this is about, send them a link to the ebooks. The standard, advanced, and premium editions all have their own version of the ebook. And what's within the ebook is not only a lot of the value proposition stuff and the things that help you understand what it's about, but also pixel perfect representations of the analytics that come out of the box. So you can quite literally look at it and say, okay, this is what's in it for purchasing, because Trey didn't get a chance to show it in the webinar, and so on and so forth. So those are things that we would highly recommend that you do socialize amongst your team if you're considering Sage Data and Analytics. And so with that, Angela, I don't know if there's any questions or any other feedback folks have provided. If there are, we'll happily take them now.
I haven't seen any yet, but let me double check the Q&A. Nope, nothing yet.
Okay, well, it's entirely fine. So just to recap a couple of high-level items that always tend to hit the FAQs. Cloud delivered application, no software to install, in your environment. In terms of the effort to kind of get up and running, we're seeing most customers that are anywhere from 24 to 40 hours of implementation time to kind of get them up and going, get them started, get them incredibly happy. I do think that something has popped into the chat. I just can't quite see it on my screen.
Yep.
Yeah, that's James. James is asking about how does this improve on the SCI and what are the big wins? I mean, we can actually, and is there an Excel data access like SCI?
Sure, yeah, so good questions, James. I see it there now. So Sage Data and Analytics really has stayed entirely focused on the browser as the platform. It's one of those things that we're doing in terms of kind of the future of financial reporting, the future of distributing financial information. A lot of folks are moving a bit more towards the browser. With that said, we do understand the importance of Excel. So in our scenarios, where some organizations may choose to pull the information into Excel for their reporting purposes. We don't have necessarily an Excel add-in. In terms of comparisons with Sage Enterprise Intelligence, I think that we probably would avoid saying anything that would be in any way derogatory. All we would really probably say is that we have and probably always will have, a broader set of connectivity to a full range of additional data sources. Furthermore, we have gotten a lot of accolades in terms of the usability, the fact that our product and the technology is deployed quickly and doesn't tend to sit on the shelf. So in terms of other kind of drill down capabilities, I think I would possibly recommend, if you want some further comparatives, that maybe ask the Pur-Logic team to set up some time, and we can certainly explore the product a bit more fully as well.
Yeah, because we know that James has done a lot of work with SCI to build his models.
Mhm.
So sometimes the concern is that work all gone and you have to rebuild, or you can look at some of that logic and can easily bring it in. So I'm sure that a lot of people do move in from legacy BIs to SD&A. So have you seen where it has been able to be portable or usable?
Yeah, so a lot of, the good thing is a lot of the logic that is applied, for other tools, whether it be Sage Intelligence or SEI or any of a number of others, that logic in terms of the calculations that live within queries, those can be readily dropped into the model side of what we do. This doesn't mean that we have an upgrade feature or whatever you would call it, but certainly any of the effort that you've put into building out logic and those sort of things, that logic can be recreated within our tool set very easily, because you can copy paste the SQL and other things that you're using. The other thing that I would possibly mention is a lot of the other tools don't tend to look across the entirety of the ERP as a model, but rather there's a sales model, and then there's a financially or a GL oriented model, and there's an AR or AP model. And so those are very much silos in a lot of the other tools, whereas you have some poor soul that's in purchasing, but they need to not only see, what's happening in terms of the sales side of things, but what's happening on the inventory ledger and what's happening in a lot of other areas, all within the same, cohesive view. And so if you've had any of those kind of cross model requirements that maybe you've used Excel historically as a means of blending that data together, know that you don't need to do that anymore, that can be done with an SD&A.
That's great. Yep, I'll follow up with James if he wants to have a one-on-one
Sure.
demo, stuff that. I know Eric is also watching. Eric, do you have any questions, or you're just doing research? I'm just gonna leave it there. So if there's no more questions, thank you very much, Trey, for your time and the wonderful demo. I know I'm always fascinated with BI. It's the beauty of creating all these wonderful reports and sending them to someone and say, voila, there you go. Now make the decision.
Right, that's exactly right. Well, no, thank you, Mo. Really do appreciate the opportunity with Pur-Logic, and the opportunity, obviously, to talk to your customers and to be recorded. And I know that you'll probably not only share this recording with the people that were here today, but maybe we'll end up on your website. Which, if we do,
Most definitely, Angela's going to be working on that as first thing as soon as she gets the recording.
okay.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Trey.
Very good. Well, thank you both. Thank you to your customers, and we really look forward to the opportunity to talk to everybody again.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.